Good morning, everyone. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning, huh? Hope everyone's morning's been great. I'm looking at the cup of coffee, like my life depended on it, just like real life. Good morning, Deanne. Good morning. And I look over there. There is someone there already, and we already know who that is, huh? Who that is, huh? That is, of course, wine addict. There you go. There's nobody here yet, unfortunately. It's just you and me, wine. So, well, how's your days been? I had quite an eventful couple of days since our last meeting and our last reading. It was really fun. I actually went out. I went out a lot this week. And it's not something that I choose to do, but I have to do because of the circumstances of which I need a new computer. And oh, there's the end. Uh, and I had to go out and get it. And it's worth it because my setup now, everything is fantastic. But the only problem that I'm facing right now is that I don't have a proper cable to my second monitor, which I'm so used to. So that's the problem basically. So now later today, I'll have to go out again, once again, to go out and then try to get the cable for my second monitor because uh, otherwise I cannot live without a second monitor basically, like because I need to like look at the stream while I am you know you know how it is. Stuff like that. Anyway, wine, how are you today? How's your morning? You have been crafting, I can see that just now. It's gonna be a slow day, huh? It seems, because it's a Thursday. What do you guys think? Ooh, I think wine is AFK actually. My pre-life doesn't have. Yeah, a second monitor is definitely a must. That's weird. The end, just to check before everyone arrived. Is my microphone okay? Is everything okay? Can you hear me? Am I clear enough to be heard? I'll try my best not to move around too much, okay? You are hearing? What are you hearing? Sometimes grounded sound? Sometimes the sentence that you come up with is like from another side of the world that I cannot understand. Like you're speaking in an alien language that like you just it's like a robot language that you just like put together some words and then I don't understand what you are saying. Grounded sound. What does grounded sound mean? Does it, like, my point is, will this affect my reading? Or will this affect my listeners' uh, ability to listen to what I'm going to read? What do you mean grounded sound? Can you explain a bit further, please? You know, I don't have a second monitor, so please don't write in another chat or anything like that. It's fine. You can just write in the chat here. Can you, Wine? Can you hear grounded sound? What is grounded sound means to you, Wine? Maybe it's a philosophical thing. Grounded sound. Maybe Diane is trying to be philosophical and I cannot understand her because I'm not very smart. What does grounded sound mean? You have no idea? What's your interpretation of grounded sound then? Maybe Diane is trying to write a poem. Electric. You know, grounded sound and electric buzzing is like totally different thing. Wine, do you hear any electric buzzing from your side? Like a hum? Yeah, that's okay. What about now? Do you still hear anything? Grounded sound and electric buzzing is like, okay, but is my voice loud enough for you to hear what I'm saying? That's another question of mine. Yeah, exactly. You know what's that grounded sound means? That is my microphone boost. If I don't boost it, my voice lowers. So listen, sometimes you gotta live with it, you know? Live with the grounded sound, whatever that means. Is that still grounded sound, please? Let me know. Hey, Vase Arafal. Good morning. That's fine. Just listen wherever you are, as long as you can listen to it. Good morning. You try following game later? Nah, it's fine. It's fine. Just do what you need to do. Working is important to get money and fuel the economy, and also be comfortable at your own pace. Oh my god. I bought Earl Grey cookies yesterday, sorry. I'm kind of looking forward to try it because I really like Earl Grey. I made Earl Grey cake before and it's really, really, really good. Like Earl Grey butter cakes. Oh my god, it's like the best. Internship unpaid. You know what? Unpaid internship should be illegal. My opinion. It should be illegal. It should never have existed. That's insane. You cannot have unpaid internship. Anyway, today it seems that there isn't a lot of people in my channel right now, but I'm gonna start anyway because it's already almost 11 past 11. So I hope the grounded sound doesn't bother anyone. Uh, okay. Let's see. Books out, and I'm ready. Oh, Savory's still asleep. That's fine. It's not important. I always have VODs. Don't worry about it. Well, with one sip of tea, and I shall start my reading. One moment, please. Today, we are continuing Natsume Sōseki's Kokoro. I thought I owed it to my dead parents to find out from my uncle the details of the family fortune which I had left to his management. It seemed that he was as busy as he professed to me, but for he never slept under the same roof for more than a few nights a time. For every 2 days in our house, he would spend 3 in town. Whenever I saw him, I found him in a fidgety mood. I'm so busy, so busy, he would automatically say, and then hurry away. Began Before I began to doubt him, I was inclined to believe that he was really busy, or when in a cynical mood, I would tell myself that it was probably the latest fashion to appear busy. But after I had decided to have a long talk with him about my inheritance, I began to suspect that he was trying to avoid such a talk. At any rate, I did not find it easy to get hold of him. Then I heard my uncle was keeping a mistress in town. The rumor reached me through an old friend of mine who had been a classmate at school. Considering my uncle's character, having a mistress was nothing to be surprised about, but I, who had never heard such a rumor about him during my father's time, was shocked. My friend told me that my friend told me of other things that were being said about my uncle. One of them was, though at one time his business enterprise were thought to be failing, his situation seemed to have improved considerably in the last 2 or 3 years. I was given another reason for suspecting my uncle. At last, I had a conference with him. To say that I had a conference may sound odd, but that is about the only way I can describe our talk. My uncle persisted in treating me like a child. While I had regarded him with suspicion from the beginning, there was certainly no chance of our talk ending amicably. Unfortunately, I am in too much of a hurry to describe the results of the conference in detail. To tell the truth, I restrain my pen, which seems anxious to reach the main part of the narrative. Having lost forever the opportunity of talking to you at my leisure, I cannot say all the things I wish to say. I am a slow and inexperienced writer, and I have little time. You remember, of course, that day when I said that there was no such thing in this world as a species of man whose unique quality is badness, and that one should always be careful not to forget that a gentleman, when tempted, may easily become a rogue. You were then good enough to point out to me that I was excited. You also asked what it was that caused good men to become bad. And when I answered simply money, you looked dissatisfied. I remember well that look of dissatisfaction on your face. I now confess to you that I was then thinking of my uncle. With hatred in my heart, I was thinking of my uncle, who seemed to typify all the ordinary men who became evil for the sake of money, and who seemed to me the personification of all those things in this world which make it unworthy of trust. To you, who wished to probe deeply into the realm of ideas, my answer must have been quite unsatisfactory. It must have been trite. But for me, the answer that I gave was a living truth. Was I not excited? I believe that words uttered in passion contain greater living truth than those words which express thoughts rationally conceived. It is blood that moves the body. Words are not meant to stir the air only. They are capable of moving greater things. In short, my uncle cheated me of my inheritance. He managed to do so without much difficulty during the 3 years that I was away in Tokyo. I was incredibly naive to have trustingly left everything under my uncle's management. It depends, of course, on the point of view. Some who do not consider worldliness a great virtue may admire such a display of innocence. At any rate, I can never think of those days without cursing myself for being so trusting and honest. I find myself asking, why was I born so good natured? But I must admit, I sometimes wish that I had never lost my old innocence, and that once more I could be the person that I was. Please remember that you met me after I had become soiled. If one respects one's elders because they have lived longer and have become more soiled than oneself, then certainly I deserve your respect. Oops. Ooh, really? Savri's watching? Thank you so much for watching, Savri. If you are in here, of course, of course, of course, of course. Just a moment, please. I just want to make sure that I'm not muted or anything. There you go. It's all good. All good. Alright. There's little doubt that if I had married my cousin, as my uncle had wished, I would have profited materially. His reasons, his real reasons for wanting to marry his daughter were of course selfish. It was not simply the interest of the two houses that he had at heart. Our marriage was to further his own base designs. I did not love my cousin, but I did not dislike her either. I find that now I take a certain amount of pleasure in the fact that I refuse to make her my wife. It is true that I would have been cheated even if I had married her, but I have at least the consolation that in one matter at least I had my way. This is, however, an unimportant detail. To you, it must seem that I was being rather silly and petty about it. Other relatives of mine stepped in to settle the quarrel between me and my uncle. I had no trust in any of them. In fact, I regarded them as my enemies. I took it for granted since my uncle had cheated me, they would also do the same. If my uncle, I said to myself, whom my father praised so much, could cheat me, then what reason have I to trust them? It was through their mediation, however, that I managed to receive all that remained to me. It was too far less than I had expected. There were two courses open to me. One was to accept quietly what was offered to me, and then the other was to sue him. I was angry, but I hesitated. I feared that if I took the latter course, I would have to wait a long time before the court reach a decision. I was a student, and time was very precious to me. I did not want my studies interrupted. I went to an I went to an old high school friend of mine who lived in town and asked him to help me to convert all my assets into cash. He advised me against doing so, but I would not listen. I had decided to leave and stay away from home for a long time to come. I had made a vow never to see my uncle's face again. Before leaving, I paid a visit to my parents' grave. I have not seen it since. I don't suppose I shall ever see it again. Hello? Is it Hello? Is it too low again? What? Hello, can you hear me? Oh my god. Sorry, guys. Technical issues, technical issues. Hello? I mean, according to my. It should sound loud enough. I don't want it. I don't really want it to be too loud. Can you guys hear me? Streaming is hard, guys. Don't start. Oh my god. Okay, good. That's good. One sip of tea, please. I think because I've moved a bit away from my microphone, I think. It's a this microphone you have to like really speak right, like your lips have to be like right in front of it. Otherwise it will not catch the sound at all. Okay. Where did I stop? Before leaving, I paid another visit to my parents' grave. I have not seen it since. I don't suppose I shall ever see it again. My friend settled my affairs for me as I had asked, though he was not able to do so before a long time had passed after my return to Tokyo. It is not an easy thing to sell one's land in the country. Besides, prospective buyers are always quick to take advantage of one's difficulties. The amount I finally reached was much less than my lands were worth. To tell the truth, my entire capital consisted of a few bonds that I had brought with me when I left home, and the money that I subsequently received through my friend. No doubt, my original inheritance was worth far more. What I found particularly galling was the fact that I myself had not been responsible for the dwindling of the family fortune. What I had, however, was certainly more than the adequate was certainly more than adequate for a student. As a matter of fact, I could not spend more than half the interest that accrued from my capital. Had I been in less easy circumstances as a student, I might not have been forced into such an undreamt of situations as later came my way. As there were no more need for me to live as economically as I had done before, I began to toy with the idea of leaving the noisy boarding house and settling in a house of my own. I was, however, somewhat hesitant at first to put the idea into practice. I did not relish the thought of having to buy the necessary household goods and of having to find an old housekeeper who was honest and whom I could depend on to look after the house properly when I was away. At any rate, I decided one day to go for a walk and at the same time see if there were any vacant houses that I might find particularly attractive. I walked down the west side of Hongodai Hill and then up the slope of Koishikawa towards Denzuin Temple. The whole area has changed in appearance since the trams started going through there, but in those days there were merely mud walls of the arsenals on the left as one walked up the slope, and on the right there were only open fields. I stopped for a moment and thinking of nothing in particular, looked towards the hill on the other side of the valley. The view is not bad even now, but it was much more pleasant then. All was green as far as I could see. It was a soothing sight. I then began to wonder whether a suitable house could not be found in the neighborhood. I walked across the field until I came to a narrow lane and then followed it northward. Even today, that neighborhood has a higgledy-piggledy look. You can imagine what it was like in those days. I walked around in circles, through innumerable little alleys until I came upon a small confectioner's. I went in and asked the woman who kept the shop whether she knew of a small but neat house that I could rent. "Well, let me see now," she said, and for a while appeared to be in deep thought. She then said, "I am afraid I can't think of any one at the moment." I decided that there was no hope, and was about to leave the shop when she said, "Would you mind living with a family?" I became interested. After all, I thought to myself, living as the only paying guest in a quiet household would probably be more convenient than having a house of one's own. I sat down, and the woman began to tell me about a family she knew of that might take me in. It was an army family, or to be more accurate, a family that had once been connected to the army. The head of it had been killed, the woman believed, in the Sino-Japanese War. The bereaved family had lived in their old house near the officers' school at Ichigaya until the previous year, but had found it too large. It was sort of house with stables attached to it, so had sold it and moved into a smaller one. There were only 3 people living in the house, the woman told me: the widow, her daughter, and one maid. The widow had apparently said to the woman that it was rather lonely in the new house, and that she would like a boarder if someone suitable could be found. I thought that the house would be very quiet and that it would suit me very well. But I was afraid that such a family would not wish to take in a student about whom they knew nothing about. I was tempted to give up the idea of going to the house. I reminded myself, however, for that as a student I looked quite respectable. Besides, I was wearing my university cap. Of course, you will laugh and say, "What is so impressive about a university cap?" In those days, university students were regarded with more respect than they are now. My square cap then gave me the confidence that I needed. Following the directions given to me by the woman in the confectioner's, and without proper introduction of any kind, I made my way into the house. I introduced myself to the widow and told her the purpose of my visit. She questioned me closely and concerning my background, my university, my field of study, and so on. My answers must have satisfied her, for she did not hesitate to say that I could move in as soon as I wished. The lady had an honest and direct manner. I was quite impressed and thought to myself, are all soldiers' wives like her? At the same time, I was surprised that a lady of such obvious strength of character could ever feel lonely. I moved in immediately. I was given the room in which our interview had taken place. It was the finest room in the house. I had by no means been living in a squalor before, but by my time, there were already few high-class boarding houses in existence in the Hongo area. I had become accustomed to living in rooms which by student standard were more than adequate. But my new room was far more impressive than any I had had before in Tokyo. When I first moved into it, I felt that it was perhaps a little too grand for a student. It was an 8-mat room. There was an alcove, and beside it some ornamental shelves. On the side approach the veranda, there was a closet 6 feet wide. There were no windows, but the room opened into a sunny veranda facing south. As soon as I moved into the room, I noticed a vase of flowers in the alcove. A koto stood against the wall of the alcove next to the flowers. Neither the flowers nor the koto pleased me. Having been brought up by a father who was fond of such things as Chinese poetry, calligraphy, and the tea ceremony, I was, from a childhood, inclined to severity in my taste. I had learned to be contemptuous of such obvious attempts at charm as I found in the alcove. Thanks to my uncle, the greater part of my father's art collection had disappeared, but there still remained to me a few items of value, most of which I had left with my friend at home for safekeeping. There were, however, 4 or 5 hanging scrolls that had struck my fancy, and these I took out of their wooden cases and put at the bottom of my trunk before leaving for Tokyo. I had been looking forward to hanging one of them in the alcove of my new room, but when I saw the flowers and the koto, I lost heart. When I learned later that the flowers had been put there to please me, I was secretly amused and exasperated. And the koto apparently had always been there, and I suppose they could not find another place for it. I think it is likely the shadow of a young woman who has already begun to pass before your mind's eye. I must admit that I began to be curious of the young lady even before I moved in. Perhaps this vulgar curiosity on my part made me self-conscious, or perhaps I had not yet overcome my youthful shyness. But whatever the reason may have been, I behaved very awkwardly when I was introduced to Ojo-san. She, on her part, blushed. Ojo-san means Miss or young lady, by the way. I had already formed a picture in my mind of what she would be like from my observation of her mother's appearance and manner. The picture was not altogether flattering. Decided that her mother was a soldier's wife par excellence, I had gone on to imagine what a typical soldier's daughter would be like, but all my preconceptions about Ojo-san vanished as soon as I saw her face, and I was filled with a new awareness, far greater than any that I had I had ever experienced before, of the power of the opposite sex. After that, the flowers in the alcove ceased to displease me. The presence of the koto did not annoy me anymore. Whenever the flowers in the vase showed signs of wilting, she would come in to replace them. Sometimes she would come in to take the koto away to her room, which was diagonally opposite mine. I would then sit quietly at my desk, my chin resting on my hands, listening to the sound of the koto. I could not be sure whether her playing was good or bad, but as she never played a piece that sounded complicated, I was inclined to suspect that she was not quite an expert. In fact, I thought it is likely that her koto playing was no better than her flower arrangement. I know something about the latter art, and I can safely say that Ojo-san was by no means a master of it. Good morning. I think that's Axia. Unblushingly, wait. Unblushingly, however, she persisted in decorating my alcove with flowers of all kinds. They were arranged always in the same way and always in the same vase. Stranger still was the music. All that one heard was a series of hesitant, disconnected plucking sounds, and one could hardly hear the singing that these sounds were meant to accompany. I do not say that she did not sing, but her singing was rather timid and had what one might call a confidential tone. When scolded, she became even less audible. Happily, however, I gazed at the badly arranged flowers and listened to the strange music. I was already a misanthrope when I left home for the last time. That people could not be trusted must already have been a conviction deeply rooted in my system. It was then that I began to think of my uncle, my aunt, and all the other relatives whom I had come to hate as typical of the entire human race. On the Tokyo bound train, I found myself watching suspiciously of my fellow passengers. When any spoke to me, I became even more suspicious. My heart was heavy. I felt as though I had swallowed a lead, but nerves were on edge. I am quite sure that my state of mind was largely responsible for wanting to leave the boarding house. It would, of course, be simpler to attribute my desire to have a house of my own to my sudden affluence, but I am convinced that I would not have gone to the trouble of moving if the change had been more economic. For quite a while after I have moved to Koishikawa, I could not relax. I looked at everything around me with such obvious shiftiness that I became ashamed of myself. Strangely enough, I became less and less inclined to talk. While my mind and eyes increased their activity enormously, I sat silently at my desk, like a cat, watched the movement of others in the house. I was so much on my guard that sometimes I had the grace enough to feel guilty towards them. I am behaving like a pickpocket who doesn't steal, I would tell myself disgustedly. You're probably asking yourself, if he was indeed in such a state, how is it that she was able to feel the affection for Ojo-san? How could he have enjoyed her bad flower arrangement and her koto playing? I can only answer that I truly did experience these conflicting emotions at the time, and that I could do no more than to describe them to you as faithfully as I can. I am sure that you are quite capable of finding satisfactory explanation yourself. But let me say this, I had come to distrust people in money matters, but I had not yet learned to doubt love. And so, strange as it may seem to another person, and inconsistent as it may seem even to me when I think about it, I was quite unaware of any conflict between the two states of mind. It was my custom to call the widow Okusan, so I shall refer her as such from now on. Okusan was wont to comment on my calm disposition, as she would call it, and my quietness, and on one occasion praised me for being so studious. She said nothing about insecurity or shiftiness. I don't know whether she failed to notice my odd behavior or whether she was too polite to comment on it, but she certainly seemed inclined to view me in a favorable light. She once went so far as to say to me in an admiring tone that I had a generous heart. I was honest enough to blush and to say that she was mistaken. She said that she had not expected to have a student in her house. Oh wait, shit. Sorry, I skipped a sentence. Sorry, a quick break. Okay. I was honest enough to blush and to say that she was mistaken. She said that she had not. Why do I keep skipping it? She said quite seriously. You say that because you are unaware of your own virtues. It seems that she had not expected to have a student in her house. When she let it be known in the neighborhood that she was willing to take in a boarder, she was apparently hoping for some kind of a civil servant to apply. I suspect that she was quite resigned to the fact that only an underpaid petty official would want a room in someone's house. When she called me a generous hearted person, she must have been comparing me with this shabby civil servant of her imagination. True, I had some money, and I suppose live in a way could afford to be liberal, but this kind of liberality had nothing to do with one's nature. It seems that Okusan, in the way that women have, was apt to assume that my attitude towards money was an indication of generosity of my heart. Okusang manners towards me gradually changed my own state of mind. I became less shifty and began to feel more relaxed. I suppose the fact that Okusang and the rest of the household took no notice of my suspicious and withdrawn manner gave me great comfort. Since there was nothing in my surroundings that seemed to justify watchfulness, I began to calm down. Okusang was a woman of some understanding, and it was possible that she behaved as she did because she knew my mood. It is also possible that she really did think of me as a peaceful, generous, and easygoing person. The latter is more likely, for I do not suppose that my outward behavior betrayed the confusion within very often. Gradually, as I grew more calm, I came to know the family better. I began to exchange witticism with Okusang and Ojo-san. There were days when I was invited to drink tea with them. There were evenings when I would go out and buy sweets and then invite them to my room. I felt that suddenly my circle of acquaintances had been considerably enlarged. True, many hours were wasted in conversations which should have been spent in study. But I was surprised to find that I did not mind this at all. Okusan, of course, had little to do all day. But to my surprise, Ojo-san, who not only attended school, but was studying flower arrangement and koto as well, never seemed busy either. And so the three of us were willing enough, whenever the opportunity presented itself, to get together and entertain one another with small talk. It was usually Ojo-san that came to call me. She would sometimes appear on the veranda, and sometimes she would come through the morning room and appear in my door. She would stand still for a moment and then call my name and say, "Are you studying?" I was usually staring hard at some heavy tome lying open on my desk, and so I must have seemed rather scholarly fellow. But to tell the truth, I was not much of a student in those days. I might have looked at a lot of books, but I was usually waiting for Ojo-san to appear. If by chance she failed to do so, then I would get up and go to her room and say, "Are you studying?" Ojo-san was a six-mat room next to the morning room. Oku-san would sometimes be sitting in the morning room and sometimes in her daughter's room. The two rooms were really used like one large room by the two ladies, neither of whom seemed to regard either room as exclusively hers. Whenever I called to them from the outside door, it was invariably Oku-san who said, "Come in." Ojo-san, even when she was there, hardly ever joined her mother in the invitation. Occasionally, when Ojo-san came into my rooms on some errand, she would sit down for a chat. And sometimes I felt strangely uneasy. Afterwards, I would try with little success to convince myself that my uneasiness was no more than the natural embarrassment of a young man finding himself alone with a young woman. It was not so much embarrassment as feeling of restlessness. And the cause of this restlessness was the net unnatural feeling that I was somehow being a traitor to my true self. She, on her part, seemed perfectly at ease, and she was, in fact, so self possessed that I would ask myself, is this the same girl that was so self conscious of her voice during her koto lessons? Sometimes, when she stayed too long, her mother would call her. I remember that on more than one occasion, she merely answered, "I'm coming," and remained where she was. Ojo-san was by no means a child, however. This was quite clear to me. What was also clear to me that she wanted me to know that she was no longer a child. After her departure, I would sigh with relief. At the same time, the room would seem empty, and I would apologize to her inwardly for the relief I had felt. Perhaps I was behaving like a woman. It must certainly seem to a modern young man like yourself, but most of us were like that in those days. Okusan hardly ever went out of the house. Whenever she did so, she was sure to take Ojo-san with her. I could not tell whether she did this for a particular reason or not. Perhaps it is not quite proper for me to say this, but it did seem to me, after I had carefully watched Okusan for a while, that she encouraged me and her daughter to become better acquainted with each other. On the other hand, there were times she appeared to be on her guard against me. The first time she gave me this impression, I was a little annoyed. You see, I wanted to know precisely what her attitude was. From my point of view, at least, her conduct was quite illogical. And having only recently been cheated by my own uncle, I could not stop myself from suspecting Okusan's duplicity and from assuming that one of her two attitudes was a deliberate deception. I could not understand the reason for her seemingly inconsistent behavior. Why should she behave so strangely? I would ask myself. And finding no answer to the question, I would angrily mutter to myself, "Women!" Then I would try to find comfort in the thought that Okusan behaved as she did because she was a woman, and women, after all, were idiots. In spite of my contempt for women, however, I found it impossible to be contemptuous of Ojo-san. It seemed that reason was powerless in her presence. My love for her was close to piety. You may think that it is strange that I should use this word with its religious connotation to describe my feelings towards a woman. But even now I believe it very strongly that true love is not so far removed from religious faith. Whenever I saw Ojo-san's face, I felt that I had myself become beautiful. Whenever I thought of her, I felt a new sense of dignity welling up inside me. If this incomprehensible thing that we call love can either bring out the sacred in man or in its lowest form merely excite one's bodily passion, then surely my love was of the highest kind. I'm not saying that I was not like other men. I am made of flesh too. But my eyes, which gazed at her, and my mind, which held thoughts of her, were innocent of bodily desire. As well as you can imagine, relations between the three of us became rather complicated. I was growing more and more fond of the daughter while my antagonism towards the mother increased. Our feelings, however, were hardly ever allowed to appear on the surface, and the change of atmosphere in the house was not openly recognized. And then suddenly, for some reason or another, I began to wonder if I had not been mistaken about Okusan. I began to think that Perhaps her apparent inconsistency was not a sign of dishonesty, and that contrary to my previous suspicion, perhaps neither of her two attitudes was a conscious attempt to deceive me. I came to acknowledge the possibility that the two seemingly conflicting attitudes existed side by side, and that the existence of one need not necessarily preclude the other. I decided finally that even when she seemed suddenly to become watchful after having encouraged her daughter to be friendly with me, she was not truly changing her mind. She was merely preventing us from becoming closer to each other than her sense of propriety allowed. I, who had no dishonorable intentions, did feel that Oksang was worrying unnecessarily, but I ceased to bear her a grudge. Hello there, Avon Senri. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for attending my reading session. Thank you. One sip of tea. Shortly thereafter, when I had observed Oksang behavior too. Okay, I shall take another sip of tea since I think I deserve it. Thank you, Exia. Shortly thereafter, when I had observed Oksang's behavior towards me in a different light, I came to the conclusion that she put considerable trust in me. Moreover, I was given reason to believe that she had begun to trust me from the time of our first meeting. This discovery was a great shock to me, who had learned to be distrustful of everybody. Are women endowed with intuitive powers so great, I asked myself, that they know at a glance whom to trust and whom not to trust? But later I said to myself, is it not because women are so trusting that they are constantly being deceived by men? It is amusing to think that it never occurred to me then to examine my own confidence in Ojo-san, which was based on nothing more than intuition. Though I had vowed never to trust people, I trusted Ojo-san absolutely. Yet I found Oku-san's trust in me quite incredible. I told them very little about my home. Concerning the incident that caused me to leave, I said nothing. It was unpleasant for me to think about it, let alone talk about it. I tried always, therefore, to steer the conversation to Oksang's past life, but she would not cooperate. She insisted many times on hearing about my home. Finally, I told them everything. When I said that I would never go home again since there was nothing left for me there except my parents' grave, Oksang seemed very moved. Ojo-san cried. I felt that I had done the right thing in telling them my story. I was glad. After our conversation, Oku-san began to act. Her intuitions about me had been confirmed and treated me as she would a young relation of hers. This did not annoy me. I was even pleased. Before long, however, I began once more to suspect her motives. It was only something very petty that put me in a suspicious frame of mind, but this did not prevent me from becoming more and more suspicious as time went by. Some small incident, I forget what, put the ideas into my head that Oksang was forcing her daughter onto me from the same motives as those which prompted my uncle when he wished me to marry his daughter. Okusan, whom I had taken for a kindly person, quickly became a cunning schemer in my eyes. I was filled with disgust. When Okusang first told me that loneliness was the only reason why she had wanted a boarder, I believed her. And after I had come to know her well, I found no cause to change my mind. On the other hand, she was by no means a wealthy woman, and from the financial point of view, I was certain not unattractive as a prospective son in law. Once more, I found myself on the defensive. Of course, I stood to gain nothing from such an attitude, since I remained very much in love with Ojo-san. I laughed at myself in scorn. I told myself that I was an idiot. If my suspicions had gone no further, I should not have suffered very much, and I should simply have laughed at myself for being such an inconsistent fool. But I began to be really miserable when the thought occurred to me that perhaps Ojo-san was no less of a schemer than her mother. It was unbearably painful to imagine the two of them plotting behind my back. I was not merely unhappy, I was desperate. But there was no other part of me that trusted Ojo-san absolutely. I stood still, unable to move away from the halfway point between conviction and doubt. To me, both seemed like figments of my imaginations, yet both seemed real. One moment, please. Hang on. Sorry. Need to check something real quick. Alrighty. It's very hard to work with one screen, to be honest. Okay. One moment, please. Okay. I continue to attend lectures at the university. Hello, Avon! In my chat. Thank you. Thank you for attending my reading session. It's been great. Welcome, 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 welcome. I continued to attend lectures at the university, but the professors who stood on the platform seemed very far away and their voices faint. I could not study either. The printed characters that my eyes saw disappeared like rising smoke before they reached my mind. Also, I became silent. Two or three of my friends misconstrued my silence and reported to the others that I seemed to be in deep kind of philosophic meditation. I did not try to undeceive them. Indeed, I was happy to hide behind the mask that they had unwittingly put on me. I cannot have entirely satisfied with the role, however. I would sometimes throw fits of riotous merrymaking that would shock them considerably. There were not many visitors to the house. Okusang seemed to have a few relatives. Ojo-san's school friends visited her occasionally, but they were so quiet that one could hardly tell they were in the house. They were being quiet for my sake, but I did not know this. My own friends who came to the house were none of them rowdy fellows, but they were not so demure as to start whispering for the sake of others for the sake of other people's comfort. Sorry, let me move my microphone. At such time,
I seemed to enjoy all the rights due to the owner of the house, while Ojo-san's position was hardly better than that of an unwanted guest. This is not a great This is not of great importance, however. I wrote down simply because it came to my mind. Besides, it leads me to something less insignificant. One day I heard a man's voice coming from Ojo-san's room. Being Ojo-san's guest, he spoke far more quietly than any of my friends would have done. I found it impossible, therefore, to hear what he was saying. I remained seated at my desk in helpless indignation. Was he a relative, I asked myself, or was he merely an acquaintance? Was he young or was he old? It was hardly, of course, impossible to find answers to these questions in my own room, but I could hardly barge into Ojo-san's room to inspect the visitor. I was more than irritated. I was in truly agony. As soon as the man went away, I left my room to ask who he was. They gave me a simple answer, but it was too simple to satisfy me. I looked at them discontentedly, lacking the courage to question them further. I had no right, of course, to be curious. I had to maintain my dignity and my self respect, which I had been taught to value. But the fact that this self respect was not succeeding too well in overcoming my vulgar curiosity showed in my discontented face. They laughed. Whether they did so in derision or out of friendliness, I was too flustered at the moment to find out. Afterwards, I repeatedly asking myself, did they make a fool of me or didn't they? I was free to do anything I like without consulting anyone. I could leave the university at any time. I could go anywhere, live in any way that suited me, and get married if I wished. Often I was on the verge of asking Okusan for permission to marry her daughter. But each time I decided to do so, I quickly changed my mind. The prospect of being refused did not frighten me. True, life would be different without Ojo-san, but I thought that there will at least be the compensation of being able to look at the new world from another vantage point. Besides, I thought that I had the necessary courage to accept such a change, sorry. But I hated the idea of being enticed by Oksan to swallow her bait. No matter what happened, I vowed to myself no one would ever dupe me as my uncle had done. Seeing me buy nothing but books, Oksan said that I should buy myself some new clothes. Indeed, all the clothes that I possessed had been made at home of cotton woven locally. It was not custom for students to wear silk in those days. I remember that a friend of mine once received a heavy silk garment from home. His father, incidentally, was a Yokohama merchant whose taste was rather ostentatious. When the garment arrived, we all laughed at the fellow. He was quite embarrassed and made all sorts of excuses. He tossed it into his trunk and would not put it on. We finally bullied him into wearing it. Unfortunately, it caught fleas from somewhere. My friend must have had it bundled. My friends must have had it pleased, for he wasted no time in getting rid of the famous garment. He rolled it up into a bundle and taking it with him in one of his walks and threw it into a large ditch in Netsu. I was with him at the time. I remember standing on the bridge and watching my friend with amusement. It never occurred to me that then to think that he was being wasteful. All this happened when I was still living in the boarding house. I had matured somewhat since then, but I was not yet so clothes conscious as to start worrying about being well dressed. I still had the odd notion that good clothes, like a mustache, came after graduation. This is why I remarked to Okusan that though books were necessary, clothes were not. She knew that I bought a great number of books, and she asked me, "Tell me, do you read them all?" Amongst them were, of course, such necessary books of reference as dictionaries, and there were also many that I had not yet even opened. I was at loss for an answer. And I thought that as long as I was going to buy unnecessary things, I might as well just spend money on clothes as on books. Besides, I had been wanting to buy Ojo-san a present, like a sash or a length of material, under the pretext of showing my appreciation for their many kindness. I asked Oku-san therefore, if she would be good enough to buy something suitable for her daughter and for myself. Oku-san refused to go by herself. She commanded me to accompany her. She insisted that her daughter to come too. Brought up as we were in an atmosphere quite different from of today, we students were not accustomed to be seen in the streets in the company of young women. Then I was even more of a slave to a convention than I am now. I hesitated at first. I finally overcame my scruples and set out with the two ladies. Ojo-san had taken great care of her appearance. Though she was naturally very light complexioned, she had covered her face liberally with white powder, which made her conspicuous. Passers-by stared at her. What gave me a strange feeling was the fact that after they had had a good look at her, they would begin to stare at me. The three of us went to a shop in Nihonbashi and bought what we wanted. It was difficult to decide what to buy, and we spent more time there than I had expected. Okusan insisted on my giving an opinion on everything that was shown to us. She would drape a piece of clothes on Ojo-san's shoulder and then ask me to step back a few paces and say, "Well, how do you like it?" I tried to play my part properly and never failed to give some kind of an opinion. "I don't think that looks very good," I would say, or "Yes, that would suit her very well." When we finally left the shop, it was time for dinner. Okusan said that to thank me for being so kind, she would like to take me out to dinner. She led us into a narrow side street called Kiharadana, where there was, I noticed, a small old-fashioned theater. The restaurant we went into was as pokey as the street. I was not at all familiar with the neighborhood, and I was amazed that Okusan should know it so well. When we finally left the shop, it was quite late in the evening when we returned. The next day was Sunday, and I spent it in my room. As soon as I appeared at the university on Monday morning, a classmate of mine came up to me and began to tease me. "When did you get married?" he said in mock seriousness. "Your wife is quite a beauty, I must say." He must have seen the three of us in Nihonbashi. When I got home, I told Okusan and Ojo-san what my friend had said. Okusan laughed and then gave me an odd look and said, "It must have been rather annoying for you." I immediately thought that this was probably a woman's way of sounding out of a man's inner thoughts. Perhaps I should have then told her frankly how I felt towards her daughter. But I was too suspicious to be honest. I restrained my impulse to tell her the truth and deliberately steered the conversation away from myself to the subject of Ojo-san's marriage. I tried to find out what Oku-san's plans were for her daughter. She clearly implied that Ojo-san had already received some offers for marriage. She explained that since her daughter was still in school, she felt there was no need to hurry. Though she did not say outright, it was obvious that she set a great store by her daughter's good looks and hinted that she could marry her off any time as she wished. Ojo-san was her only child, and of course, she was reluctant to part from her. I suspected that she was in a quandary as to whether she ought to allow her daughter to marry into her family or whether she should arrange to adopt a son-in-law who would become a member of her own household. As the conversation progressed, I felt that I was learning so much that was of interest to me from Okusan. But I had lost the opportunity of talking about myself. Thinking that I could not, at this last stage of the conversation, put a word on my own behalf, I decided to leave as soon as I could do so without seeming rude. Ojo-san was sitting near to me when I told them what my friend had said that morning. She even merrily said, "That's going too far." But she had quietly withdrawn to the corner of the room in the course of the conversation. and was now sitting at her back turned towards me. I was not aware that she had moved until I was about to get up and go. I saw her back when I turned around to look at her. It was, of course, impossible to read her thoughts without seeing her face. I could not even begin to guess how she felt about marriage. She sat near the closet. The door was open, and I decided that she had taken something out of it and placed it on her lap and was looking at it. Through the open door of the closet, I caught a glimpse of the pieces of clothes that I had bought 2 days before. The cloth that I had bought for her and the cloth that I bought for myself were lying on top of each other. I said no more, and I was about to stand up when Okusang suddenly said to me in a serious tone, "What do you think?" Her question was so sudden that for a moment I wondered what she was talking about. Then I realized that she was asking me whether or not her daughter should get married soon. "Oh, I think she should wait for a while, don't you?" I said. Okusan said that she thought so too. The relationship between the three of us had developed thus far when another man appeared on the scene. He became a member of the household, and by doing so changed the course of my destiny. If this man had never crossed my path, I don't suppose there would ever have arisen the necessity for me to write this long letter to you. The devil had passed before me, so to speak, casting me his shadow over me for a moment, and I did not know that his passing had darkened my life forever. I must tell you that it was I who dragged this man into the house to live with us. Needless to say, I had first to get Oksang permission to do so. I told her everything about the man and asked her if he might come and stay with me. At first, she said no, but while I felt myself absolutely obliged to invite him, she seemed to have no reasonable basis for her objection. Finally, I had my way. I was able to do what I thought was right. Good morning, Zig Zamboni, Luke. Good afternoon to you. How's it going? You gonna stay and listen, or are you gonna go and do something else later? Thank you for dropping by the way. I really appreciate it. Oh, cool. You're listening? Cool. You missed out on, like, I think 3 videos, 3 reading sessions of this, but there's no worries. There's always VODs. But we are in a very, very heavy section of the book towards the end, basically like a revelation of why a character acted as he does in the beginning of the book. So this is like the important part of the book. So it's really great. It's like a revelation part of the book, and it's going really good so far. Okay, a sip of water, and I will continue. I shall say here my friend K. I shall here call my friend K. K and I were friends from the time we were children. Needless to say, then we were from the same part of the country. K was the son of the priest of Shinsu sect. He was the second son and was sent as an adopted son to the house of a certain doctor. The Hongan church was a very powerful of my native district, and so Shinshu priests were more affluent than the priests of other sects. For example, if a Shinshu's priest happened to have a daughter of marrying age, he would have little trouble marrying her into a suitable family through the kind of offices of a parishioner. Of course, the wedding expenses would not come out of the priest's pockets. For reasons such as this, Shinshu's priests were very generous, were generally quite prosperous. Kei's family lived comfortably, but whether they possessed enough means to send their younger son to Tokyo to complete his studies, I do not know. Nor do I know that the arrangement for his adoption were made in order that his chances to further education might improve. Whatever the reason, then, Kay went as an adopted son to the house of the doctor. This happened when we were still in secondary school. I remember even now my surprise when during the roll call in class one day I found that my friend's name had suddenly changed. Kay's new family was a wealthy one, and his education was to be financed by them, so he came to Tokyo. Though Kay and I did not travel up together, we moved into the same boarding house, and in those days it was quite common. It was a common practice for the two or three students to live and sleep in one room and work at desks placed next to each other, as did Kay and myself. We were like wild beasts captured in the mountains that hug each other and stare angrily from their cage at the world outside. We feared Tokyo and the people in it. Nevertheless, when we were in our little six-mat room, we would talk contemptuously of the whole world. But we were in earnest and seriously intended to become great men one day. Indeed, Kay was very earnest. Having been born in a temple, he would often spoke of concentration of mind, and to me it seemed that this phrase described completely his daily life. My heart was filled with the reverence for Kay. From the time we were at school, Kay was in the habit of embarrassing me by bringing up such difficult matters as religion and philosophy. I do not know whether this was the result of his father's influence or the result of having been born in a house possessing an atmosphere peculiar to temples. At any rate, it seems to me that he had more of the priest in him than the average priest. Kei's foster parents had originally sent him to Tokyo with the intention of making him a doctor, but Kei, who was very stubborn, had come to Tokyo resolved never to become a doctor. I reproached him, pointing out that he was deceiving his foster parents. Undaunted, he agreed with me and then answered that he did not mind doing such a thing, so long as it led him to the true way. In all likelihood, even he did not know what he meant by the true way. I certainly did not know, but to us who were young, those vague words seemed quite sacred. Ignorant though I was certain that there was no meanness in his enthusiastic decision to follow the dictates of what seemed to me to be noble sentiments. I fully agreed, therefore, with Kay's views. To what extent Case was encouraged by my agreement, I do not know. Undoubtedly, Kay, single minded as he was, would not have altered his opinion, no matter how much I might have disagreed with him. And though only a child I was, I think more or less aware of my future responsibility through having encouraged Kay should anything happen to him as a result of his decision. My enthusiastic approval implied that in the future, if such an occasion should arise when we would cast our more mature eyes back on what he had done, I would be fully prepared to bear my proper share of responsibility. Even though at this moment I might not have felt fully prepared for such a necessity. Kay and I entered the same faculty. Without any show of bad conscience, he began to follow his beloved true way with the money that his foster parents sent him. And I can only say that he was less troubled than I by his deception. He seemed quite certain that he would never be caught. He seemed assured enough even if he were caught he would not be mine at all. When the time came for our first summer vacation, Kay did not go home. He said that he was going to rent a room in some temple in Komagome. And true enough, when I returned to Tokyo in early September, I found him holed up in a dirty temple by the Great Canon. His room was a small one, very close to the temple main building. He was very happy that he had been able to study to his heart's content. It was then, I think, that I saw that his life was becoming more and more like that of a priest. He was wearing a rosary around his wrist, and then I asked him what it was for. He showed me how he counted the beads with his thumb, saying 1, 2, and so on. Apparently, he counted them many times a day, but the meaning behind all this counting, I did not understand. Surely, I thought, there is no end to counting beads strung together in a circle. With what thoughts in mind did Kay count those beads? This worthless question often comes to my mind now. I also noticed that a Bible in his room. I was a little surprised, though I could not recall that on occasion he had spoken of the sutras. I could not remember he's ever mentioned Christianity. I could not therefore resist asking him why the Bible was there. Kay said that the Bible was there for no particular reason except he thought it only natural that one should read a book so highly valued by others. He added that he intended to read the Quran when he had the opportunity. He seemed particularly interested in the phrase Muhammad and the sword. Finally, but after being urged to do so by his people, he went home for the following summer vacation. It seems that when at home, he said nothing about his field of study. His family seemed not at all suspicious. You, being a well educated person, are obviously well informed about such matters, but the world in general is surprisingly ignorant about student life, academic rules, and so on. These things, which are common knowledge to us, are not known at all in the outside world. Also, we who live in a comparatively isolated atmosphere are not entirely blameless in that we tend to assume that academic matters, whether important or not, are well known throughout all walks of life. In this particular matter, however, it seemed that Kay was more worldly than I. Looking quite unperturbed, he left home. We were traveling to Tokyo together, and as soon as we boarded the train, I asked Kay how things stood between him and his family. He answered that all was well. At the beginning of the third summer, it was at the end of that I have decided to leave forever the birthplace of my parents, and I urged Kay to go home, and he would not listen. Indeed, he asked me why it was that I went home every year. Evidently, he wished to remain in Tokyo and study. With reluctance, I left him in Tokyo and went home alone. Concerning the 2 months that I spent at home, which so affected my future life, I shall not write again, since I have already done so. With my heart filled with dissatisfaction, melancholy, and loneliness, I saw Kay again in September, and I found that circumstances had changed for the worse for him too. Without my knowing, he had written to his foster parents, confessing that he had been deceiving them. Apparently, he had from the start intended to write such a confession eventually. Perhaps he hoped that they would say that it was too late to change his plans and permit him, no matter how grudgingly, to pursue his studies as he wished. At any rate, it seems Kay had no desire to deceive his foster parents once he was ready to enter the university. He may have perceived that he could not possibly go on with the deception indefinitely, even if he wanted to. Kay's father was furious when he read Kay's letter. He sent back a severe reply in which he said that he could not possibly finance the education of one so unprincipled as to cheat his parents. Kay showed the letter to me. He also showed me another letter that arrived about the same time as the first. It was from his original family. It was a reprimand as severe in tone as the other. Perhaps the severity was due to his family's sense of obligation to those that had adopted Kay. At any rate, Kay was told that for anyone to worry about him would be a waste of time. whether he should return to his original family because of the unhappy incident, or whether he should consider some way of compromise and remain with his adopted family was a problem for the future. And what required his immediate attention was the question of how he was to pay for his education. I asked Kay whether he had any definite ideas about the matter. He said that he thought he might teach in some night school. Compared with now, conditions were surprisingly easy in those days, and it was not as difficult as you think to find some way of supplementing one's income. I therefore thought that Kay would manage to well enough. At the same time, I felt my own responsibility in the matter. When Kay decided to go against his foster father's wishes and to follow his own inclinations, it was I that encouraged him. At this stage, then, I could not very well stand aside and idly watch my friend in his predicament. I immediately offered Kay's material assistance. Kay refused without hesitation. It was in his character to feel greater pleasure to be able to fend for himself than in receiving assistance from his friend. In his views, in short, was that once having entered the university, it would be a disgrace to him as a grown man not being able to solve his own problems by himself. I could not hurt Kay's feelings merely to satisfy my own sense of responsibility. I therefore withdrew, leaving Kay to do as he saw fit. Shortly after, Kay found the kind of work he wanted, and you can well imagine how painful it was for Kay, who valued his time so much, to have to do such work. And with this new burden on his shoulders, he drove himself harder than ever, so that he might study as he had done before. I began to worry about his health, but he was a stout-hearted fellow and took no notice of my anxious warnings. About this time, relations between him and his adopted family grew steadily worse and more complicated. As Kay had now no time to spare, we had little opportunity to talk as we had done before, and I did not hear all the particulars. But I knew how much more difficult of solution the whole problem had become. I knew also that one person had tried to act as a mediator between the two parties. This person had actually tried by letter to persuade Kay to come home, but Kay refused, saying that it was absolutely impossible. The stubbornness on his part, or so it seemed to the people at home, though Kay had pointed out to them that he could not leave Tokyo during term time, made the situation worse. Not only did he hurt his foster parents' feelings, but he angered his original family as well. In my anxiety, I wrote a conciliatory letter to soothe their feelings, but it seemed to have no effect whatsoever. My letter, it seems, did not merit even a word in reply. I also became angry. Circumstances had so far made me sympathize with Kay, but now I was determined to stand by Kay whether he was right or wrong. In the end, Kay decided to become officially a member of his original family once more. They arranged to pay back to Kay's late foster parents the money spent on his education so far. However, beyond this, his family would do no more. They had washed their hands of him, they said. He was, I suppose, expelled from his father's house, to use an old-fashioned phrase. On the other hand, perhaps his family did not intend to be so final in their treatment of Kay, but Kay at least felt that he has been disinherited. Kay was motherless, and it was more than likely that a part of his character was a result of his having brought up by a stepmother. I cannot feel that had his real mother been alive, with such a wide gulf might not have come to exist between him and his family. I have already said that Kay's father was a priest, but I believe that in his unbending regard for honor, he was perhaps more like a samurai than a priest. One quick moment for bio break, and I'll be right back in about 2 minutes. Be right back. I'm back. Oh, Exia is teleporting. It's okay. Go do your things. Alright, let's continue, my friends. The excitement over Kay had abated somewhat when I received a long letter from his elder sister's husband. Kay told me that this man was related to his foster parents and had therefore played an important part of the proceedings when he was adopted and when his adoption was revoked. In the letter, the brother in law asked me to let him know if all was well with Kay. He said that Kay's sisters was worried and that she would like to have news of him as soon as possible. Kay was fonder of his sister than he was of his elder brother, who had succeeded to his father's rectory. They were born of the same mother, but there was a considerable difference in age between Kay and his sister. To Kay, she must have seemed more of a mother than a stepmother ever did. I showed the letter to Kay. He made no comment, except that he himself had received 2 or 3 letters similar in content from his sister, and that he had written back saying there was no need to worry. Unfortunately, his sister had not married into a well-to-do family. Though he sympathized with Kay, she could give him no material assistance. I wrote a reply to the brother-in-law, repeated more or less what Kay had already said in his letters. I did add, however, strongly worded assurance that Kay could always count on my assistance whenever it was necessary. I was, of course, sincere in my assurance. I felt too I should try to comfort Kay's sister as best as possible. But there is no doubt that insisting so strongly that I would and could assist Kay, I was also being that indirectly spiteful to his father and his foster parents, who had, it seemed, treated me with contempt. Kay's adoption was revoked in his first year at the university. For a year and a half after that, he worked hard to support himself. Eventually, I began to think that this continual strain was affecting his physical and mental condition. Of course, the squabbling that preceded his decision to leave his adoptive family must have left a mark on him. He became more and more sentimental, and occasionally he would talk as though he was carried on his back the misfortune of all mankind. When one pointed out that the unreasonableness of such an attitude, he would become infuriated. Then he would begin to worry about his future, which seemed not as promising as it did before. It is true that it is true that everybody begins his university career cherishing great ambitions, like a man who sets out on a long journey, that after a year or two, most students suddenly realize the slowness in their progress, and seeing that graduation is not far off, find themselves in a state of disillusionment. Kay had no doubt reached that stage in his career, but his despondency was far greater than was normally found among his fellow students. I'd finally decided that the only thing to do was to try to calm him down a little. I said to him that he should do no more work than necessary. I told him that for the good of his great future, he should rest and enjoy himself. Knowing Kay's stubbornness, I did not expect him to find my task easy. But once again, but once begun, I found it far more difficult and exasperating than I had ever imagined. He held that scholarly knowledge was not his only objective. What was important, he said, that he should become a strong person through the exercise of willpower. Apparently, this could be done only by living in a straitened circumstances. Judged by the standards of a normal person, he was perhaps a little mad. Moreover, straitened circumstances seemed not at all to be strengthening his willpower. Indeed, they were making a neurotic out of him. In desperation, I pretended to be in wholehearted agreement with his views. It had always been my wish, I said, to lead a life such as his. I was not totally I was not being totally insincere. I had always found Case persuasive in argument, and he could momentarily convince me of almost anything. Finally, I suggested that he live with me so that I might learn to lead his kind of life. Because of his stubbornness, I was forced to bow to him. At last, I succeeded in bringing him to the house. There was attached to my room a small anteroom of four mats. One had to go through it to get to my room from the front hall. It was not therefore very conveniently situated. I put Kay there. It had been my intention to share my room with Kay and to leave the other room free for both of us to use as the occasion demanded, but Kay would not listen to my suggestion, saying that he would rather have a room of his own, however small it might be. As I said, Oksang was against this arrangement from the first. In a boarding house, she said, two lodges would be more convenient than one, and three would be more profitable than two. But she pointed out she was not running a boarding house. She had no wish to take in another lodger. I said that my friend would give her no trouble. Trouble or no trouble, she answered. She disliked having a stranger in the house. But I was a stranger too, I said. Her answer was that she had from the first known that she could trust me. I smiled. She then changed her tactics. She said that I would later regret having brought such a person into the house. I asked her why she thought so. It was her turn to smile. Indeed, there really was no reason why I should insist on sharing my apartment with Kay, but I felt that he would hesitate to accept my assistance if I were to offer it to him every month in the form of money. He was a very independent-minded person. For this reason, I thought it is advisable for him to live with me and to give Okusang, without his knowledge, enough money to pay for our food. But I had no wish to tell Okusang about Kay's financial difficulties. I did, however, say that I was worried about Kay's health. I said that if allowed to keep on living in solitude, he was sure to become more eccentric than ever. I told her also of the troubles he had had with his foster parents and of his later expulsion from his original family. It was, I said, in the hope of lending warmth to his cold and lonely life that I wanted him to come and stay with me. Would not Okusang and Ojo-san, I asked, look after him with the warm kindness that he so much needed? Okusang raised no more objections. I said nothing about this conversation to Kay. I was glad that he had no inkling of what had been said with regard to his entering our household. He arrived with a dignified and absent-minded air. In my normal manner, I received him. Okusang and Ojo-san helped him unpack his bags. All he said was, "Not bad." His answer struck me as being somewhat incongruous, considering that he had been living until then in a squalid, damp room which faced north. His food had been in keeping with his room. As far as I was concerned, he had raced from the bottom of a dark valley to the top of a sunlit mountain. No doubt his stubbornness was partly responsible for his apparent indifference towards the change, but I am sure that he was being indifferent on principle. Having grown up under the influence of Buddhist doctrine, he seemed to regard respect for material comfort as some kind of immorality. Also, having read stories of great priests and Christian saints who were long since dead, he was wont to regard the body and the soul as entities which had to be forced asunder. Indeed, he seemed at times to think that mistreatment of the body was necessary for the glorification of the soul. I decided that the best thing for me to do was to avoid arguing with him at all cost. I decided to leave the piece of ice out in the sun and wait until it had melted and turned into warm water. Then I thought he would begin to see the errors of his ways. Okusang was giving me a similar treatment, and I was gradually becoming more cheerful. Knowing the efficacy of this treatment when applied to myself, I decided to try it on Kay. I had known him too long not to know that there was a considerable difference in our characters, but I thought nevertheless that just as my nervousness had become less acute since I entered the household, so also would Kay be soothed by its atmosphere. Kay had one small willpower. Kay had more willpower than I. He must have been studied twice as much as I did. Moreover, he had greater natural intelligence. I cannot say much concerning his academic standing at the university since we were in different fields, but at both secondary school and college, where we were in the same class, he was always ahead of me. I had indeed come to regard myself as inferior to Kay in every way, but when I talked Kay into moving with me, I believed that I was for once displaying a greater common sense than he. It seems to me that he did not see the difference between stubbornness and patience. I want you to pay attention to what I am going to say. It is intended for your benefit. The development or destruction of man's body and mind depend upon external stimuli. Unless one is very careful and unless one sees to it that the intensity of the stimuli is gradually increased, one will find too late that the body or the mind has atrophied. According to the doctors, there is nothing that requires more attention than the human stomach. Give it nothing but gruel, and you will apparently find one day that it has lost the power to digest anything else. That is why the doctors tell us to accustom our stomach to all kinds of food. But I do not think that it is simply the matter of habituation. It is, I think, more a question of increasing the efficiency of the stomach through the gradual adding of stimuli. You can imagine what will be the effect of if the process were reversed. Kay was a much abler fellow than I, but he seemed not to see the simple truth in this principle. He seemed to be under the impression that one had become accustomed to hardship, one would quickly cease to notice. The mere repetition of the same stimulus was to him a virtue. He believed, I think, that there would come a time when he would become insensitive to hardship, that it might eventually destroy him never entered his head. I wanted to say all this to Kay, but I knew that he would violently disagree with me. And no doubt, I thought to myself, he would, in the course of his argument, refer to those men of the past. Meek as I was in his presence, I would then be obliged to point out the difference between him and them. He would take this as a rebuke and would advance to a position more extreme than ever before in order to prove his consistency. And having done this, he would later feel compelled to put practice what he had maintained in his argument with me. In this respect, he was really frightening and very impressive. He would willfully proceed to his own destruction. A VTuber having a fit? Hang on, let me check. No, it's just because I'm looking down at my book. It's, it's doing fine, I think. It was very. I'll try to fix it later on and see how it goes. Alrighty, let us continue. But however one looked at him, he was certainly no ordinary fellow. At any rate, I knew his character too well to think that I could tell him what I honestly thought. No, no, don't worry about it. It's helpful for you to point it out. Don't worry about it. At any rate, I knew his character too well to think that I could tell him what I honestly thought. Moreover, I was afraid that he had become a little neurotic of late, and supposing that I could have worsted him in an argument, he would still have become terribly agitated. I was not afraid of quarreling with him, but remembering what pain my own loneliness had given me, I did not have the heart to place Kay, who was my friend, in a state of lonely isolation such as mine had been, or was still. Push him into far greater loneliness than I myself, had ever experienced. And so I tried not to be openly critical of his ways, even after he had moved in with me. I decided to wait quietly and see what the change of surroundings would do for him. Secretly, I went to Okusang and Ojo-san and asked them to talk to Kay as much as possible. It was my opinion that the silent life Kay had so far been living had bad effects on him. I could not help thinking that his heart, like a piece of iron, had gone rusty from these years. Okusang laughingly said that Kay was an unapproachable sort of person. Ojo-san, by way of illustration, told me that of an encounter she had had with Kay. She had apparently gone to Kay and asked him if there was any fire in his brazier. No, he had said. Well, would you like a fire? No, thank you. Aren't you cold? Yes, I am, but I don't need fire. And he had refused to discuss this matter any further. I could hardly laugh at such an incident with such a comment as eccentric, isn't he? I felt I owed them some kind of explanation. True, it was spring, and fire was not absolutely necessary. But I could not blame the two ladies for thinking that Kay was a difficult man to handle. I tried very hard in the role of perpetual go-between to establish a harmonious relationship between Kay and the two ladies. If I had happened to be conversing with Kay, I would ask the ladies to join us. If I had if I happened to be with the ladies, I would try to get Kay to come out of his room and be with us. Suiting my tactics to the occasion, I did everything I could to bring them together. Kay did not like this, of course. Sometimes he would suddenly get up and leave our company without a word. Sometimes he would refuse to come out of his room when I called him. Why is it, he once asked me, that you take so much pleasure in useless small talk? I merely laughed, and though I knew in my heart that I was being despised. It is possible that in a sense I deserve his contempt. His point of view in everything was much loftier than mine. I do not deny this. But when the loftiness is merely in one's point of view, then one is hopelessly handicapped as a human being. I decided that what he needed above all else was humanizing. No matter how full one's head might be with the image of greatness, one was useless, I found out, unless one was a worthy man first. In an attempt to make him more human, then I tried to encourage him to spend as much time possible with the two ladies, and I thought when he had once become accustomed to the atmosphere which the presence of women seems to bring about, he would become less a recluse and more lively. My experiment seems gradually to succeed. What had at first seemed difficult to accomplish became more and more easy. Kay, I thought, was learning to acknowledge the existence of a world other than his own. He said to me one day that women were, after all, not as contemptible as one might think. Kay had always expected the same kind of knowledge and education from women as he did from men, and in his disappointment he had come to regard them with contempt. He had not known that there was a way to judge women and a way to judge men. If you and I said to him, were to spend the rest of our lives as bachelors, forever talking to each other, we would advance merely in a straight parallel line. Of course, he said. My mind was so full of Ojo-san at the time, and my opinion were naturally influenced by this fact. But I said not a word to Kay about the underlying cause of my remark. It was very pleasing to me to see him gradually emerge from his fortress of books and to see his heart beginning to thaw. Such had been my hope from the first I brought him to the house, and it was natural that I should be happy to see my plan succeeding so well. I told Okusan and Ojo-san, though not Kay himself, how happy I was to see the change in him. They seemed pleased too. Although Kay and I were students in the same faculty, we studied different subjects. We would therefore leave the house and return to it at different times. If I was the first to get back, I would simply walk through his room to get to my own. But if I happened to return after him, then I would say a word or two to him in passing. Kay would look up from whatever he was reading when he heard me opening his door and say in answer to my greeting, "Did you just get back?" I would nod silently or say yes as I walked past his desk. One day, it so happened that I had to go to Kanda on my way home. I returned much later than usual. With the hurried steps, I walked up to the front door and slid it open, without not without much not without some noise. Just as I did so, I heard Ojo-san's voice. I was certain that it came from Kei's room, facing from the front hall, the morning room behind it. Ojo-san's room to the left of the front hall was Kei's room, and then mine. I had lived in the house too long to not be able to tell where the voice was coming from. Quickly, I closed the door behind me. Then Ojo-san stopped talking. While I was taking off my boots, I had just begun wearing those cumbersome lace-up boots, which were then fashionable. There was not a sound in Kay's room. I thought this strange. I began to think that perhaps I had been mistaken. But when I opened the door to Kay's room as usual, I found the two of them seated comfortably facing each other. "Did you just get back?" said Kay. Ojo-san remained seated and said, "Welcome home." It may have been my imagination, but I thought I detected a little stiffness in her simple greeting. Her tone struck to me as being somehow unnatural. "Thank you, wine." Sip, sip. Let me sit comfortably. Okay. Okay. Her tone struck to me as being somehow unnatural. I said to Ojo-san, "Where's Okusan?" The question contained no subtle meaning. I simply asked it because the house seemed unusually quiet. Okusan, it turns out, was not at home. She had gone out with a maid, and Kei and Ojo-san then were left alone in the house. I could not what I could not but wonder at this. Okusan had never left me alone in the house with Ojo-san, and I had lived with them considerably longer than Kei. I asked Ojo-san if Okusan had left on some urgent business. She merely laughed. She merely laughed. I dislike women who laughed at such time. I suppose one can dismiss this weakness as something that is common to all young women. At any rate, Ojo-san was wont to find some cause for laughter in the most trivial things. When Ojo-san saw the expression on my face, however, she became serious again. "No, it was nothing urgent," she said. As a boarder, I had no right to question her further. I said no more. I had hardly changed my clothes and settled down in my room when Okusan and the maid returned. Shortly thereafter, we sat down to dinner. Before I came to know the family well, it used to be the custom for the maid to bring all my meals to my room on a tray. But they soon ceased to treat me like a boarder, and I began to eat regularly with them. When Kay moved in, therefore, I asked them to invite him to join us at meal times, and to show my appreciation for doing so, I bought them a light dining table made of thin wood with folding legs. It would seem that such tables are to be found in all houses now, but in those days there were very few families that owned them. I took no trouble of having one specially made by the furniture maker in Ochanomizu. It was a while we were seated around this table then that Okusan told me the fish vendor had failed to come that day at the usual hour, and that she had consequently gone out to buy some fish for us. Why, of course, I said to myself, one had to do such things when one had boarders. Ojo-san looked at me and began to laugh. She stopped quickly enough when her mother scolded her. Again, about a week later, I returned home to find Kei and Ojo-san talking to each other again in his room. On one occasion, Ojo-san began to laugh as soon as she saw me, and I suppose I should have asked her then what it was that she found so amusing. Instead, I went straight to my room without saying a word. I gave Kei no time to greet me with his usual "Did you just get back?" Very soon afterwards, I thought I heard Ojo-san going back to the morning room. At dinner, Ojo-san said that I was a strange person. I, I did not ask her why she thought so. I did notice, however, that Oku-san was glaring at her. After dinner, I persuaded Kei to go for a walk with me. From the back of the Denzuen temple, we went around the botanical garden and returned to the bottom of the slope at Tomizaga. It was a fairly long walk, and we stayed very little in it. Kei was by nature less talkative than I. I was not a very talkative person myself, but on this occasion I tried to carry on a conversation with him. I wanted mostly to discuss the family with whom we were staying. I wanted to know how Kei regarded Oku-san and Ojo-san. But to my question, he gave replies so vague that one could not tell whether they came from the mountains or the sea. Despite their vagueness, however, there were rather simple answers. The subject of his special studies seemed to interest him more than the two ladies. True, our second year examinations were drawing near, and I suppose that from the point of view of a normal person, Kay was behaving more like a student than I was. I remember that he amazed me. I was not very scholarly, with references to Swedenborg and so on. When we had successfully completed our examinations, Oksang was very pleased for our sake and said, "Well, you now have only 1 year to go." Ojo-san too, who was Oksang one real pride, was due to graduate soon. Kei remarked to me that women seem to graduate without having learned a thing. He attached no importance whatsoever to those things which Ojo-san was studying outside of school, such as the koto, flower arrangement, and sewing. I laughed at his stupidity. He did not argue. Once more, I told him that his was not the proper way to judge the worth of a woman. He did not argue with me. On the other hand, he did not appear to be convinced. This pleased me. His attitude, which seemed to suggest that the subject did not merit serious discussion, I took to be an indication of the contempt with which he still regarded women. I decided that Ojo-san, whom I looked upon as the embodiment of womanly qualities, was a little significant to Kei. It is obvious to me now that I was already more than a little jealous of him. I suggested to Kei that we should go somewhere during the summer holidays. He said that he was not very anxious to leave Tokyo. He was certainly in no position to go anywhere he liked, but there was nothing to prevent him from joining me if I invited him. I asked him why he did not wish to go away. There was no particular reason, he said. He simply wanted to stay and read books. I pointed out that it would be far better for us, for our health, if we went to some cool resort and read our books there. Well, he said, if that was why I wanted to go away, then I should go alone. But I did not want to leave him in the house. I had already come to regard his growing familiarities with the two ladies with some discomfort. But wasn't that what you wanted? You might ask. Didn't you force Kei on them? Certainly I was a fool. Oku-san, seeing that we would never reach an agreement if left alone, stepped in and helped us make our minds. At last, it was decided that the two of us should go to the coast of Boshu. Kei had not traveled very much. It was my first trip to Boshu. Knowing nothing about the part of the country, therefore, I got off the boat as soon as we could. We found ourselves, I remember quite clearly, in a place called Hota. It may be quite different now, but in those days it was a very unpleasant fishing village. There was the smell of fish everywhere, and wherever we tried to bathe, we were beaten down by the waves, knocking about among the huge pebbles until we emerged with our hands and feet quite raw. I soon tired of the place, but Kei showed neither approval or disapproval. Despite the fact that he never came out of the sea unwounded, he seemed at least outwardly quite indifferent to his surroundings. Finally, I managed to convince him of the unpleasantness of Hota and we left for Tomiura. From there, we went to Nako. That part of the coast was by then very popular with students. We found no difficulties in finding suitable places for bathing. Kay and I often sat on the rocks near the shore, and I watched the sea stretching far beyond the horizon, and for or the sandy bottom visible through the waters nearby. The scene below the rocks was especially beautiful. We could see brightly colored fish, some of them red and some of them deep blue, which one would never find in the fish market swimming about in the clear water. Often I took books with me to the rocks and read them there. Kay, on the other hand, usually did nothing, sat near me in silence. I could not decide whether he was meditating, nor drinking in the beauty around him, or simply daydreaming. I would occasionally look up and ask him what he was doing. Nothing, he would say. Often I found myself thinking how nice it would be if the person sitting quietly by my side was not Kei but Ojo-san. Unfortunately, this pleasant thought invariably led me further to the point where I would begin to wonder whether Kei was not sitting there indulging in the exact same reverie. Then I would become restless and cease to enjoy the book I happened to be reading. And I would begin to shout in a loud voice. I could find no satisfaction in such mild forms of emotional release as reciting a poem or singing a song. Instead, I shouted, as an uncontrolled savage might have done. Once I grabbed Kay's neck from behind. "What would you do," I said, "if I pushed you into the sea?" Kay did not move. "Without looking back," he said. "That would be pleasant. Please do." Quickly, I withdrew the hand that had been holding his neck. It would seem that by then Kay's nervous condition had improved considerably. My nerves, on the other hand, had become increasingly high strung. I envied Kay, who was so much calmer than I. I hated him. What annoyed me was that he took no notice of me, no matter what I did. I took this as a sign of Kay's self-confidence, but that Kay had grown more confident of late gave me little satisfaction. I wanted to discover the real cause of the change in him. Had he simply become optimistic about his studies and his future career once more? If so, there was no reason why there should be any rivalry between us. Indeed, I thought I would find satisfaction in the fact that my efforts to help him had not been in vain. But if this new serenity had come as a result of his contact with Ojo-san, then I would find it impossible to forgive him. Kei seemed totally unaware of my love for Ojo-san. Of course, I had been careful not to be obvious about it, but there is no denying that in such matters Kei was quite insensitive, and I must confess that it was because I was aware of this insensitivity in him that I was less reluctant than I might have been to invite him to live with us. I decided to confide my secret to Kay. Actually, I've been wanting to do so for some time, but I found myself incapable. When talking to Kay, of seizing or creating the right moment to introduce the subject casually. When I think about it, my acquaintance in those days were all rather odd. There was not one among them that showed any inclination to discuss his own romantic problems without restraint. I suppose many of them not to ex- I suppose many of them really had nothing to talk about. At any rate, it would seem that it was a custom atmosphere must think this strange. Whether we were still under the influence of Confucian teaching or whether we were only being shy, I shall leave you to decide for yourself. Kay and I are close friends. Sorry, one moment, please. Okay, I'm back. Kay and I are close friends. and there was little that we did not feel free to discuss with each other. On rare occasions, we would talk about love, but never was the subject allowed to go beyond theorizing. And as I said, it was very seldom discussed. We hardly ever talk of matters other than our future careers, our ambitions, means of disciplining our minds, our scholarly interests, books, and so on. Though we were good friends, there was a stiff formality about our friendship, and it was difficult for me to break through this wall of formality. The character of our friendship had become had already been formed, and we would come closer only in very limited ways. Many times I was on the verge of telling him about Ojo-san, but always I was checked by the insurmountable wall that stood between us. Often, in exasperation, I would feel like hammering a hole somewhere in his head so that a gentle, warm breeze might blow into it. All this must seem quite absurd to you. I was nevertheless in great torment at the time. I was no less timid than I had been in Tokyo. I watched Kay closely, hoping that he would give me a chance to confide in him, but not once did he emerge from his forbidding aloofness. It was as though his heart was encrusted with a layer of black lacquer, so thick that no warm blood could ever penetrate it through it. There were times, however, when I found some consolation in his apparent high mindedness, and I would regret having suspected such a person and inwardly apologize to him. I would then begin to hate myself for my baseness. I was never contrite for long, however, for very soon I would be assailed by the same old doubts. At such time, I would compare myself with Kay, always unfavorably, of course, since the desire to compare originated in doubt. Surely, I would tell myself he's better looking than I, and his nature too, which seems less fussy than my own, must be more appealing to the opposite sex. As for his absent minded air, would not women say that as a sign of manly strength? True, we were studying different subjects, but I knew only too well that in intellectual ability I was not his equal either. All in all, I would decide I was a rather unappealing fellow in comparison, and so my momentary relief would soon be replaced by my old fears. Kay noticed my unsettled state and said that it would be all right with him if we went back to Tokyo. When he said this, the idea of returning to Tokyo suddenly became distasteful to me. It is possible that I did not want to let him go back. At any rate, I decided to continue our trip. We went around the headland of Boshu, groaning in the heat of the midsummer sun we walked on. The walk began to seem quite senseless to me, and I said so in half-joking manner to Kay. "We are walking because we have legs," he answered. When it got too hot for us, we would take our clothes off and jump into the sea. What with the swimming and the broiling heat, we were completely exhausted by the end of the day. I think this is a good place to stop. It's been 2 hours. Yeah, I think this is a good place to stop. I'm gonna stop here today, and then I think by the length, by the amount of pages left behind, I think we would definitely finish this on Saturday. I believe so. I think so. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, as usual. To my regulars, to the new people who came by, and also to the people in my stream. I'm not sure if you guys are here before or not, but thank you for being there with me. Thank you so much. Thank you. Lanika Supernova, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming here. I hope you enjoyed uh, this reading session with me. I do this every alternate days. Um, the next one would be on this coming Saturday, 11 a.m. GMT plus 8 as usual. But tomorrow evening, I will be playing Borderlands with my friends at 7 p.m. GMT plus 8. And I hope that you all will enjoy my stream. Thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. And oh, oh, thank you. Thank you for being here with me, guys. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we'll be able to finish up the rest of Kokoro on Saturday, and then next Monday, the next schedule will be on Monday. Monday we will be reading a new book, and it's a book that I've never read before as well, so it's gonna be interesting. Thank you so much once again to Supernova for stopping by. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Deanne, for supervising everything as usual. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Sevri, in the stream chat. Hello. Alright, it's time. If you guys wanna claim anything that you all wanna claim, or I don't know. I'll give you guys about 5 minutes because I'm going to have my lunch and then I'm gonna head out for to pick something up outside. And to Zig Zamboni, who's in my chat, I think he's still there. I hope you're still there. How did you enjoy the reading session? It's very calming, isn't it? Sorry, I tend to read really fast when I'm nervous. If you can hear that I'm reading really fast, so that usually means that I'm really, really nervous. Thank you. I'll see you guys on Saturday. And Exia, isn't this top amazing? Like, I've been waiting for this top to be available for female characters for so long, and finally I can wear it. I'm so happy about it. Oh, why is it that every time I am trying to end the stream, there are like more people in the stream? Hello, people in stream. If you would like to know what kind of content I create or I go live for, I usually do this thing called Nudibles, which is a play on word on audibles, and it is where I read books to people out loud, basically, and that I do this once every alternate days. Yep. Oh, yeah. Once every alternate days. So the next one will be on this coming Saturday, 11 a.m. GMT plus 8. But besides that, I also stream rating content.
Have you ever had a dream that you could don't do you want don't.
Hell yeah! Twisty knows what I like. Hell yes. That's how you vibe in the morning. Every morning you have to listen to that song. Hell yes. Anyway, yes, I also stream rating content. This afternoon, I think Dian and I are probably going to be progging the X trial, the N singer X trial. And I might stream then. Yeah, I might stream then. Might stream other stuff as well. I stream other game as well. But yeah, my next stream, official stream, will be tomorrow, 7 p.m. GMT plus 8. I'm gonna play Borderlands with my boys, Strudo Expludo, ooh ooh ooh, and Sam Caroli. The next Noodle will be on Saturday at 11 a.m. GMT plus 8. And other time, I would just um, stream without really having a schedule. I just stream whenever I feel like it, unprompted streams. So follow me on Twitch channel if you are interested in my content, and follow me on Twitter to find out when I go live, because I always send a tweet before I go live. So check out my Twitch channel stream schedule. If you want to listen to previous Noodibles, they are all available. The VODs are all available in the video section of my channel, all nicely categorized in there, so you can listen to them there. And then you can also check out my Twitter, because it's a pretty cool page. And for that, I shall bid you all a very good afternoon, and have a nice day. And I shall also end my stream with the best song ever. Oh no, I can't. Wait, give me a moment. I'm going to give you something more fun to listen to. If you're interested, if you are interested in watching my rating, if you are interested in watching my rating content, this is usually the face that I put on when I'm rating. It means that I'm not angry at you, I'm just rating. And this soundbite is it's a preview of the kind of rating content that you can experience in my Twitch channel. I hope you enjoyed that, and have a nice day all. Goodbye. Bye. Have a nice day.